Your grandmother's pantry was filled with ingredients that could cure a cold, tenderize the toughest meat, and create flavors we can't buy today. But somewhere between convenience foods and supermarket shopping, we lost the secret ingredients that made every meal extraordinary. These weren't exotic spices or fancy imports. They were everyday items that every housewife knew how to use. What I'm about to show you will revolutionize your cooking forever. 1. Nasturtium flowers and leaves, the peppery garnish. Your grandmother's salads were the talk of every church social, not just because they tasted better than everyone else's, but because they looked like they came from a fancy restaurant. While other women served plain lettuce with store-bought dressing, your grandmother's salads were decorated with bright orange and yellow flowers that made guests stop and stare. Those cheerful flowers weren't just for looks. They packed a peppery punch that was stronger than radishes and added a sophisticated bite to simple salads. Your grandmother would also use the round lily pad-shaped leaves, which had the same peppery flavor, but in a milder form. She'd scatter the flowers over potato salad, tuck the leaves into sandwiches, and even stuff the larger leaves with cream cheese for elegant appetizers. 2. Beef suet, the ultimate cooking fat. Back when a pound of butter cost 65 cents and that was real money, your grandmother knew a secret that made her pie crust the talk of the church social. She'd walk into the butcher shop and ask for beef suet, the hard fat from around the kidneys that most people threw away. The butcher would wrap it in brown paper and hand it over for free, thinking he was doing her a favor. Little did he know he was giving away liquid gold. Your grandmother would take that suet home and render it slowly on the stove, filling the kitchen with rich aromas that meant serious cooking was happening. The result was pure white fat that had no beefy flavor, but made pie crusts so flaky they'd shatter at the touch of a fork. While her neighbors struggled with tough, chewy crusts made with expensive shortening, your grandmother's pies were legendary. The secret was that suet created steam pockets when it hit the oven heat, making pastry that was impossibly light and crispy. Today we spend a fortune on fancy European butters, but your grandmother got better results with something the butcher gave away for free. 3. Saltpeter, the meat preserver. When your great-grandfather butchered a hog in November, your great-grandmother faced a problem that could mean the difference between eating well all winter or going hungry by March. Without refrigeration, that fresh pork had to be preserved, and she knew exactly what to do. She'd walk to the pharmacy and ask for saltpeter, potassium nitrate that the pharmacist kept behind the counter like it was medicine, which in a way it was. She'd mix that white powder with salt and spices, creating a curing mixture that would transform tough pork shoulder into ham that was better than anything you could buy. The saltpeter kept the meat pink and safe while it cured in the smokehouse, preventing the deadly bacteria that could kill a family. Your great-grandmother would rub that mixture into every piece of meat, then hang it to cure, checking it daily as it transformed from raw pork into preserved protein that would feed the family for months. It was food science before anyone called it that, and the knowledge of proper ratios meant survival. Today, we buy our ham from the deli counter, never knowing that our ancestors created better-tasting meat with nothing but salt, spices, and this one crucial ingredient that most people have never heard of. 4. Lamb's quarters, the wild spinach. Your grandmother never pulled those tall diamond-leafed plants from her vegetable garden because she knew something that modern gardeners have forgotten. They were more nutritious than the spinach she paid good money for at the store. While other women spent their grocery money on wilted greens that had traveled hundreds of miles, your grandmother harvested lamb's quarters right from her own backyard, getting fresher, more nutritious greens for free. These so-called weeds were actually a superfood that grew without any care or attention, thriving in the same soil where her tomatoes and beans struggled. Your grandmother would harvest the young, tender leaves and cook them exactly like spinach, but they tasted better, milder and less bitter than store-bought greens. She'd sauté them with bacon fat and onions, or add them to soups and stews where they provided more vitamins and minerals than expensive vegetables. The plants grew so abundantly that she could harvest them all summer long, providing fresh greens when the spinach in her garden had bolted in the heat. Today we call them weeds and spray them with herbicides, but your grandmother knew they were nature's gift to smart cooks who understood that the best ingredients often grew wild. 5. Cream of tartar, the secret leavener. Your grandmother's angel food cake was so light it seemed to float off the plate, and every woman in the neighborhood begged for her recipe. She'd smile and share the ingredients, but she never mentioned the one secret that made all the difference. Hidden in her spice cabinet was a small tin of cream of tartar, a white powder that cost 15 cents and lasted for months. While other women struggled with flat, heavy cakes, your grandmother knew this one ingredient was the key to perfection. Before baking powder was invented, cream of tartar was what separated the good bakers from the great ones. Your grandmother would whip egg whites to soft peaks, then gradually add the cream of tartar, watching as they transformed into glossy, stable peaks that could support the most delicate cake batter. The magic happened in the chemistry. Cream of tartar stabilized the egg whites and reacted with baking soda to create the perfect rise. The result was cake so light and airy that guests would take tiny bites, trying to make it last. Today's bakers use commercial baking powder and wonder why their cakes don't have that old-fashioned texture. The secret was this simple white powder that your grandmother treasured like gold. 6. Arrowroot powder, the gentle thickener. When your grandmother made gravy, it was always silky smooth and never had that chalky taste that ruined so many Sunday dinners. While her neighbors struggled with lumpy, gritty gravies made with flour or cornstarch, she had a secret weapon that came in a small tin from the general store. Arrowroot powder cost twice as much as regular flour, but your grandmother knew it was worth every penny for the results it delivered. The magic of arrowroot was that it worked at lower temperatures and created sauces so smooth they looked professional. Your grandmother would mix it with cold liquid first, creating a slurry that would blend seamlessly into hot dishes without forming a single lump. She used it for delicate custards that never curdled and fruit sauces that stayed crystal clear, showing off the beautiful colors of summer berries. While other women served cloudy, thick sauces that tasted of raw starch, your grandmother's gravies and sauces were so perfect that guests assumed she had special training. The truth was simpler. She understood that this one superior ingredient could transform ordinary cooking into something extraordinary. 7. Purslane, the omega-3 powerhouse. While other women spent their mornings pulling weeds from their vegetable gardens, your grandmother was harvesting one of the most nutritious plants on earth. Purslane, with its thick, succulent leaves and sprawling growth habit, was dismissed by most gardeners as a pest. But your grandmother knew it was actually a superfood that provided more omega-3 fatty acids than expensive fish. And it was growing right there in her garden for free. She'd harvest the tender stems and leaves, adding them to salads where their lemony, slightly salty flavor and satisfying crunch made simple lettuce taste gourmet. The thick leaves held up well in cooking too, and she'd add them to soups and stews where they provided nutrition that money couldn't buy. Purslane was practically indestructible. It thrived in poor soil, needed no watering, and kept producing all summer long. Your grandmother would often joke that it was the only plant that grew better when you tried to kill it. Today, we pay premium prices for omega-3 supplements and exotic superfoods. But your grandmother got better nutrition from a weed that most people threw in the compost pile. 8. Rose water, the floral enhancer. There was something mysterious about your grandmother's pound cake that made it different from everyone else's. The recipe seemed simple enough: butter, sugar, eggs, flour. But when other women tried to copy it, their cakes never tasted quite right. The secret was a small bottle of rose water that she kept hidden in the back of her spice cabinet, using just a teaspoon to transform ordinary cake into something that tasted like it came from a French bakery. Rose water wasn't perfume. It was a flavoring that Middle Eastern immigrants had brought to America, and smart housewives adopted it immediately. Your grandmother would add just enough to complement the vanilla, creating complex flavors that made people pause and wonder what made her baking so special. The delicate floral notes elevated simple ingredients into something sophisticated and memorable. When guests complimented her cake, she'd smile knowingly, sometimes sharing her secret with special friends who proved they could be trusted with such valuable culinary knowledge. Today, we settle for artificial flavors and wonder why homemade desserts don't taste as good as we remember. The secret was this one bottle of liquid elegance that cost pennies but delivered results that money couldn't buy. 9. Juniper berries, the game changer. When your grandfather came home from hunting with a deer slung over his shoulder, your grandmother never worried about that strong, gamey taste that made wild meat tough to swallow. While other wives served venison that tasted like the woods and made the family grimace, your grandmother had a secret that transformed tough game into something tender and delicious. She'd reach for a small jar of juniper berries, those blue, pine-scented berries that weren't berries at all, but were worth their weight in gold for what they could do to wild meat. She'd crush those berries with the back of a spoon, releasing aromatic oils that smelled like gin and Christmas trees. Then she'd rub them into the meat along with salt and other spices, creating a coating that would penetrate deep and neutralize those wild flavors that could make game unpalatable. The juniper worked like magic, cutting through the strong taste and making the meat tender enough that even the children would ask for seconds. Your grandfather's hunting buddies would always comment on how much better his venison tasted than theirs, never knowing that the secret was your grandmother's knowledge of this one ingredient that turned necessity into culinary triumph. 10. Violet leaves, the vitamin C boost. Every spring, when the first violets appeared in your grandmother's garden, she'd send the children out with baskets to harvest the heart-shaped leaves that most people ignored. While other families suffered from winter's vitamin deficiency and waited for expensive oranges to arrive at the store, your grandmother knew that these humble leaves contained more vitamin C than citrus fruits and were growing right outside her kitchen door for free. The tender young leaves had a mild, slightly sweet flavor that made them perfect for adding to salads and soups. Your grandmother would chop them fine and mix them into potato salad or add them to chicken soup, where they provided nutrition that helped the family stay healthy through the long winter months. She'd also dry the leaves to make tea that was both medicinal and refreshing, knowing that this simple plant could prevent the scurvy and weakness that plagued families who couldn't afford fresh fruits. The violets grew wild throughout her garden, requiring no care or attention, but providing health benefits that money couldn't buy. Today, we spend fortunes on vitamin supplements, but your grandmother got better nutrition from weeds that most people mowed down without a second thought. 11. Mace, nutmeg's sophisticated sister. Your grandmother's sugar cookies were legendary at every church social and bake sale. They looked simple enough, just butter, sugar, flour, and eggs, but they had a warm, mysterious flavor that made people take one bite and immediately reach for another. Other women tried to copy the recipe, but their cookies never had that special something that made your grandmother's so irresistible. The secret was Mace, nutmeg's more sophisticated sister that cost 3 times as much, but delivered flavors that regular nutmeg couldn't match. While everyone knew about nutmeg, Mace was the secret weapon that professional bakers guarded jealously. Your grandmother would grate it fresh from the delicate lace-like pieces, creating aromatic powder that would perfume the entire kitchen. The spice gave her cookies that warm, complex flavor without the brown specks that nutmeg would leave behind. She'd add just a pinch to the dough, and the resulting cookies had a sophistication that made them seem like they came from an expensive bakery. Guests would often ask for thirds, trying to identify that mysterious taste that made these simple cookies so special. Today we use pre-ground spices and wonder why our baking doesn't have that old-fashioned complexity. The secret was this one precious spice that your grandmother understood better than any cookbook. 12. Caraway seeds, the digestive aid. Your great-grandmother's sauerkraut was famous throughout the county, not just because it tasted better than anyone else's, but because you could eat a big helping and never feel bloated or uncomfortable afterward. While other families suffered through heavy meals that left them feeling stuffed and miserable, your great-grandmother knew a secret that made even the richest foods easy to digest. She'd sprinkle caraway seeds into everything: cabbage dishes, root vegetables, even rich meat stews, knowing they were medicine disguised as seasoning. Those small crescent-shaped seeds weren't just flavoring, they were functional food that helped families feel better after eating. Your great-grandmother would buy them by the pound from the spice merchant, storing them in airtight tins to preserve their digestive powers. She'd toast them lightly in a dry pan before adding them to dishes, releasing their essential oils and intensifying their ability to prevent the bloating and discomfort that came from heavy meals. The result was food that not only tasted better, but actually made people feel better, and neighbors would often ask for her recipes, not knowing that the secret was understanding how spices could be both flavoring and medicine. 13. Dandelion greens, the bitter medicine. Before herbicides killed them all, your grandmother would harvest dandelion greens from her yard every spring, knowing that these bitter leaves were nature's liver cleanser and blood purifier. While other women cursed the yellow flowers that ruined their perfect lawns, your grandmother saw free medicine and nutrition growing right outside her door. She'd harvest the young leaves before the flowers appeared, when they were at their most tender and least bitter. The leaves were too bitter to eat raw, but your grandmother knew exactly how to make them palatable. She'd sauté them with bacon fat and onions, or add them to soups and stews, where their bitterness balanced rich flavors and provided the cleansing properties that helped families stay healthy. The dandelions required no planting, no watering, no care at all. They just appeared every spring like nature's gift to smart cooks who understood their value. Your grandmother would often say that God put medicine in the most common places, and dandelions were proof of that wisdom. Today, we spray them with chemicals and wonder why we need expensive detox supplements. But your grandmother got better results from weeds that grew wild in every yard. 14. Alum powder, the pickle crisper. Every summer, your grandmother would spend weeks canning pickles, and come winter, her jars were always the first to empty at family gatherings. While other women's pickles turned mushy and disappointing, your grandmother stayed crispy and perfect for months. The secret wasn't in her recipe or her technique. It was in a small container of alum powder that she kept with her canning supplies, using just a pinch to create pickles that stayed crunchy no matter how long they sat in the jar. Alum powder was the difference between prize-winning pickles and disappointment. Your grandmother would measure it carefully. Too much would create an unpleasant metallic taste. Too little would result in soft pickles that nobody wanted to eat. She'd add it to the brine at exactly the right moment, stirring it in completely before adding the vegetables. The powder worked by firming up plant cell walls, maintaining that satisfying crunch that made homemade pickles superior to anything from the store. Her pickle jars were always the first to empty at church suppers because everyone knew that her pickles would have that perfect snap that made them irresistible. 15. Plantain, nature's Band-Aid. Your grandmother's first aid kit wasn't in the medicine cabinet. It was growing right in her lawn. Those broad-leafed plants that most people considered weeds were actually nature's Band-Aids, and your grandmother knew exactly how to use them. When someone got a cut, bee sting, or scrape, she'd send them outside to pick a few plantain leaves, then show them how to chew them into a poultice that would stop bleeding and prevent infection. The leaves contained natural compounds that were antiseptic and healing, and they worked better than expensive store-bought remedies. Your grandmother would also dry plantain leaves to make tea that soothed coughs and digestive problems, or grind them into powder that could be sprinkled on wounds. The plants grew everywhere, in the lawn, along paths, in the vegetable garden, requiring no care but providing medicine that was always available when needed. Children learned to identify plantain early, knowing that these humble weeds could help them when they got hurt playing outside. Today, we rush to the pharmacy for expensive first aid supplies, but your grandmother had better remedies growing right under her feet. 16. Rennet tablets, the cheese maker. When the cow was given more milk than the family could drink, your great-grandmother never let a drop go to waste. She'd reach for her rennet tablets, small pills that looked like medicine but contained the power to transform liquid milk into solid cheese that would feed the family for weeks. While other families bought expensive cheese from the store, your great-grandmother created better-tasting cheese in her own kitchen using nothing but milk, salt, and these magical little tablets. She'd dissolve a tablet in cool water, then add the mixture to warm milk, watching as it magically transformed from liquid into curds floating in clear whey. The process required knowledge that was passed down through generations. The milk had to be exactly the right temperature, the rennet had to be completely dissolved, and the timing had to be perfect. Your great-grandmother would cut the curds with a long knife, then heat them gently until they released their whey. The resulting cheese was fresh, creamy, and infinitely better than anything available in stores. It was food independence that ensured families always had protein, even when money was tight, and store-bought cheese was a luxury that few could afford. 17. Wood sorrel, the lemony snack. Children in your grandmother's neighborhood never needed to ask for lemonade on hot summer days because they knew where to find nature's sour candy growing wild throughout the garden. Wood sorrel, with its distinctive 3 heart-shaped leaves that looked like clover, provided a lemony tartness that made kids pucker their lips and come back for more. Your grandmother encouraged them to nibble on the leaves and flowers, knowing they were getting vitamin C and a healthy snack that cost nothing. The sour, lemony taste came from oxalic acid in the leaves, the same compound that made rhubarb tart. Your grandmother would add wood sorrel to salads for a bright, acidic note that woke up bland lettuce, or make it into a refreshing drink that tasted like lemonade but required no sugar or lemons. The plants grew wild throughout her garden, thriving in shady spots where other plants struggled. She'd often send visiting children outside to find the sour grass, watching them discover this natural treat that grew right under their feet. Today, we buy expensive sour candies filled with artificial flavors, but your grandmother's generation got better tasting sourness from a weed that grew wild everywhere. 18. Sassafras root, the spring tonic. Every March, when the sap started running and the first green shoots appeared, your grandfather would take the children into the woods with shovels and burlap sacks. They were hunting for sassafras roots, the aromatic treasure that would cleanse the family's blood and prepare their bodies for summer. This wasn't just a pleasant walk in the woods, it was a medical mission that connected families to the land and the wisdom of generations who understood that food and medicine were often the same thing. Your grandfather would teach the children to identify the distinctive three-lobed leaves and dig the fragrant roots that would sustain the family's health through the changing seasons. Back home, your grandmother would clean and chop the roots, then boil them into a reddish tea that was both refreshing and medicinal. Families would drink it daily during the spring months, believing it cleansed the blood of winter's toxins and prepared the body for summer's heat. The tea had a distinctive flavor that was both spicy and sweet, and it was also used to flavor root beer and other beverages, giving them that taste that modern sodas can't replicate. It was preventive medicine that tasted good and cost nothing but time and knowledge. 19. Garlic scapes, the mild garlic green. Your grandmother never threw away the curly green shoots that grew from her garlic bulbs because she knew they were a second crop hiding in plain sight. While other gardeners cut off the scapes and tossed them in the compost, your grandmother harvested them like the treasure they were. These tender, curly stems had all the flavor of garlic, but in a milder, more delicate form that was perfect for dishes where regular garlic would be too strong. She'd chop the scapes and use them like mild garlic in stir-fries, omelets, and soups, getting 2 crops from one plant. The scapes were particularly good in early summer when they were tender and sweet, before they became tough and woody. Your grandmother would saute them with butter and salt as a simple side dish, or chop them fine and mix them into potato salad where they provided garlic flavor without the harsh bite of raw cloves. By harvesting the scapes, she also ensured that her garlic bulbs would grow larger underground, since the plant's energy went into the bulb instead of the flower. It was smart gardening that maximized both flavor and harvest from every plant. 20. Isinglass, the crystal clear clarifier. When your grandmother served her famous tomato aspic at holiday dinners, guests would marvel at how crystal clear and jewel-like it looked, while other women struggled with cloudy, unappealing jellies that looked more like mistakes than elegant dishes. Your grandmother's aspics were so clear you could see every ingredient suspended inside like they were floating in glass. The secret was isinglass, a substance made from fish bladders that had the unique ability to clarify liquids without affecting their flavor. Your grandmother would order isinglass from specialty suppliers, and it would arrive in sheets that looked like thin, translucent paper. She'd dissolve it in warm water, then add it to her liquid at exactly the right temperature, stirring gently to avoid creating bubbles that would ruin the crystal clear effect. The process required skill and timing, but the results were spectacular. Jellies and aspics that were so clear and beautiful they looked like they belonged in fancy restaurants. It was professional technique brought into the home kitchen by women who refused to accept anything less than perfection, and guests would marvel at the clarity and beauty of these elegant dishes. 21st. Pumpkin blossoms, the edible flowers. When your grandmother's pumpkin vines produced more male flowers than needed for pollination, she never let them go to waste. While other gardeners watched the bright orange blossoms wither and fall, your grandmother was harvesting them for the kitchen, knowing they were a delicacy that Italian immigrants had brought to America. The large trumpet-shaped flowers were not only edible, but delicious when prepared correctly. She'd pick the male flowers early in the morning when they were fully open, being careful to leave enough for the bees to pollinate the female flowers that would become pumpkins. The blossoms had a mild, slightly sweet flavor that was enhanced by stuffing them with ricotta cheese or cream cheese, then dipping them in batter and frying until golden. The result was an elegant appetizer that looked like it came from a fancy restaurant, but cost nothing more than the effort to harvest them. Your grandmother would also chop the petals and add them to salads for color and mild flavor, or use whole flowers as edible garnishes that impressed dinner guests. It was using every part of the plant, turning what others saw as waste into gourmet food. 22. Capers, the flavor bomb. Your grandmother's salmon croquettes were so good that the recipe was requested at every church potluck, but when other women tried to make them, they never tasted quite right. The salmon was the same, the breadcrumbs were the same, even the seasoning seemed identical, but something was missing. The secret was a small jar of capers that your grandmother kept in her refrigerator, using just a few of these tiny pickled flower buds to transform simple ingredients into something extraordinary. Capers were expensive. A small jar cost as much as a pound of good coffee, but your grandmother knew they were worth every penny for the flavor they delivered. She'd chop them finely and fold them into the salmon mixture, or leave them whole as garnish, depending on the desired effect. Those tiny buds packed an incredible punch of briny, lemony flavor that cut through rich foods and brightened heavy dishes. The result was croquettes that had complexity and sophistication that couldn't be achieved with more common ingredients. It was sophistication that came in a small jar and lasted for months, transforming everyday meals into special occasions that family members would remember for years. 23. Anchovy paste, the umami secret. Long before anyone knew what umami was, your grandmother was using a secret ingredient that made her Caesar salad legendary throughout the neighborhood. The dressing looked simple enough: oil, lemon juice, garlic, parmesan, but it had a depth and richness that made people crave more. Other women tried to copy the recipe, but their dressings never had that mysterious something that made your grandmother's so irresistible. The secret was a small tube of anchovy paste hidden in the back of her refrigerator. Your grandmother would squeeze out just a tiny amount and mash it with garlic and lemon juice, creating a base that gave the salad its distinctive flavor without making it taste fishy. The paste added the meaty richness that made simple lettuce satisfying and complete, and guests would often ask for the recipe, never suspecting that the secret was a humble tube that cost less than $1, but delivered professional results. She also used it in stews and gravies, where a small amount would add depth and complexity that made people wonder what the secret ingredient was. It was the original flavor enhancer that worked better than any chemical additive. 24. Sunflower petals, the colorful garnish. Your grandmother's sunflowers weren't just for show. They were a source of food that most people never thought to use. While neighbors admired the giant yellow blooms and waited for the seeds to ripen, your grandmother was harvesting the bright yellow petals to add color and mild flavor to her salads and soups. The petals had a slightly bitter, nutty taste that complemented other flavors without overpowering them. She'd pluck the petals from freshly opened flowers, being careful to use only the outer petals and avoid the center where the pollen was concentrated. The petals could be used fresh as a colorful garnish, or dried and stored for winter use when bright colors were scarce on the dinner table. Your grandmother would sprinkle them over salads like confetti, or float them into soups where they added visual appeal that made simple dishes look elegant. The sunflowers grew tall along her garden fence, providing privacy, beauty, and food all from the same plant. It was using every part of the garden, turning ornamental plants into functional ingredients that added both nutrition and beauty to family meals. 25. Citric acid, the natural preservative. When your great-grandmother spent weeks canning peaches every August, her preserves would still taste like fresh fruit come January, while other women's canned goods had that flat, lifeless flavor that made you long for summer. The secret wasn't in her technique or her recipe. It was in a small container of citric acid that she bought from the pharmacy, where it was kept with other medicinal supplies because people understood that this simple powder was essential for safe food preservation. Your great-grandmother would add citric acid to the fruit as it cooked, watching as the natural colors brightened and the flavors intensified. The acid prevented browning, enhanced the natural fruit flavors, and ensured that her preserves would last through the winter without spoiling. The result was preserves that retained their fresh taste and beautiful appearance through months of storage, providing summer flavors in the depths of winter when fresh fruit was just a memory. It was food science that worked with nature instead of against it, ensuring that families could enjoy the best of the harvest year-round. 26. Vanilla beans, the real deal. Your grandmother's vanilla ice cream was so good that neighbors would find excuses to drop by on Sunday afternoons, hoping she'd offer them a bowl, while other women used vanilla extract and wondered why their desserts didn't have that rich, complex flavor. Your grandmother knew that real vanilla beans were the secret to creating desserts that tasted like they came from expensive ice cream parlors. Those long black pods were expensive. A single bean cost as much as a dozen eggs. But your grandmother understood they were an investment in flavor that would pay dividends for months. She'd split each bean with a sharp knife, scraping out the tiny black seeds that provided visual proof of real vanilla. The seeds went into the ice cream base, while the pod was buried in her sugar canister, creating vanilla sugar that would flavor cookies and cakes for months to come. Even after using the seeds, she'd add the spent pods to milk when making custards, extracting every bit of flavor from these precious ingredients. The result was desserts with complex, sophisticated flavors that couldn't be achieved with extract alone. It was ingredient management that maximized both flavor and value, and her vanilla-scented desserts were legendary in the neighborhood for their depth and complexity. 27. Cardamom pods, the exotic warmth. Your grandmother's coffee cake was requested for every church social, and the recipe was guarded like a family secret. The cake looked ordinary enough, but it had a mysterious warm spice that made people take one bite and immediately ask for the recipe. Other women would try to guess the secret ingredient. Was it cinnamon? Nutmeg? Allspice? They never suspected that the answer was cardamom, those small green pods that your grandmother bought from a specialty spice merchant who understood their value. Cardamom was expensive and exotic, brought to America by Scandinavian immigrants who knew its power to transform ordinary baking into something special. Your grandmother would crack the pods with the flat side of a knife, then grind the seeds in a small mortar and pestle, releasing aromatic oils that would perfume the entire kitchen. She'd add just a pinch to the cake batter, and the resulting coffee cake had a sophistication that made it seem like it came from a European bakery. Guests would often ask for the recipe, and your grandmother would smile knowingly, sometimes sharing her secret with special friends who proved they could handle such precious culinary knowledge. 28. Tamarind paste, the sweet-sour secret. Your grandmother's barbecue sauce was legendary at every family reunion and church picnic. While other women served sauce that tasted like it came from a bottle, your grandmother's had a mysterious, tangy, sweet flavor that nobody could replicate. People would beg for the recipe, offering to trade their own family secrets, but your grandmother would just smile and say it was an old family recipe. The truth was simpler. She knew about tamarind paste, that dark, sticky concentrate that most people had never heard of, but that could transform ordinary sauce into something extraordinary. She'd buy tamarind paste in blocks from a specialty store, soaking pieces in warm water to create the paste that would give her sauce its distinctive flavor. The tamarind provided a fruity sourness that was completely different from vinegar or lemon juice, creating complexity that balanced the sweetness and heat perfectly. Your grandmother would mix it with tomatoes, spices, and vinegar, creating a sauce that had depth and sophistication that made people wonder if she'd trained as a professional chef. The secret was understanding that good flavor knew no borders, and this exotic ingredient could make American barbecue taste better than anything you could buy. 29. Sumac, the lemony spice. Your grandfather's grilled chicken was the best in the neighborhood, and every backyard barbecue host tried to figure out his secret. The chicken looked ordinary enough, but it had a beautiful reddish color and a tangy flavor that made it irresistible. Other men would ask about his marinade, his cooking technique, even his grill setup, but they never suspected that the secret was your grandmother's spice blend that she'd rub on the meat before your grandfather even lit the coals. The secret ingredient was sumac, a deep red powder made from dried berries that provided lemony tartness without adding moisture that would prevent proper browning. Your grandmother would mix it with salt and other spices, creating rubs that penetrated the meat and provided both flavor and that distinctive reddish color that made the finished chicken look professional. The sumac cut through the richness of the skin and added visual appeal that made the chicken look as good as it tasted. Neighbors would often ask for grilling tips, never suspecting that the secret was a simple red powder that most people had never heard of. 30. Orange flower water, the delicate perfume. Your grandmother's pound cake was requested for every wedding reception and special occasion because it had a subtle elegance that made it perfect for celebrations. The cake looked simple, but it had a delicate floral note that made it seem like it came from a French bakery. Other women would try to copy the recipe, but their cakes never had that mysterious something that made your grandmother's so special. The secret was orange flower water, a clear liquid distilled from orange blossoms that provided sophisticated flavor in just a few drops. Your grandmother would buy orange flower water in small bottles from specialty stores, using it sparingly because its delicate flavor could easily be overwhelmed by heavy-handed application. She'd add just a teaspoon to the cake batter, then watch as guests tried to identify what made her cake so different from everyone else's. The orange flower water provided a sophistication that elevated simple ingredients into something that seemed expensive and exotic. When people complimented her baking, she'd smile knowingly, sometimes sharing her secret with special friends who proved they could handle such precious culinary knowledge. These 30 forgotten ingredients prove that our grandmothers were culinary scientists who understood flavor, nutrition, and preservation in ways we've lost. From the nasturtiums growing along their garden fences to the exotic spices in their pantries, they knew that the right ingredient could transform simple food into something extraordinary. Their gardens and kitchens were treasure troves of flavor waiting to be rediscovered. Subscribe to learn more secrets from America's greatest home cooks, and check out the next video to discover the forgotten cooking techniques that made these ingredients sing